Hi, I'm Mark Nosikoff. I'm a lead senior analyst with Hyperion Research and lead storage analyst. Today I'll be providing a brief update for storage and interconnects relative to the HPC market, and then turning it over to three individuals for our storage panel. So starting with the update for you, looking at the overall market, we see that the storage market is very healthy, a very large component of the overall HPC on-prem storage market, consisting of roughly 20% of all HPC spending, and it constitutes the largest growth rate across the HPC market at 9.1%. It's historical place within the spending within the HPC market, and we expect that to continue not only through this forecast period, but even beyond. And it's because of this, the health and robustness and attractiveness of the storage market that we continue to see so much activity and investment and innovation in the area, providing the business value to the companies doing it, but also the requirements placed on storage to allow the researchers and scientists to be able to do their HPC work. So in addition to the spending that's on-prem, there's also continued and growing spending on storage in the cloud. With an overall cloud spend rate forecast to be $8.8 billion in 2024, almost $3 billion of that, roughly a third of it, is forecast to be storage. Within the spending within the cloud market, we see roughly 2/3 of it is on compute and a third on storage, with a very healthy 17.3% growth of the storage component of the HPC spend in the cloud. And it should be noted too that this spend in the cloud is what the users are spending, reaching into their pocket and spending on cloud resources to run their workloads in the cloud. It does not include any spend by the CSPs who are acquiring the storage and to provision the infrastructure to the users. It is strictly what the users are spending to run their workloads in the cloud. We historically see this makeup and adoption selection of the primary HPC storage vendors. Dell is the leading HPC vendor from a storage perspective. Relative to the question of where did the HPC users acquire their primary HPC system from? Who did they buy it from? This is a historical perspective, and given that HPC procurements tend to stay in place anywhere from 3 to 5 years, it does take a while for any changes or growth within other players to be reflected in the surveys and research that we do. So within this view, we continue to see roughly 3/4 of the procurements are made through the system vendors themselves, and another 20%, a little over 20% of the independent storage vendors. We do see innovation occurring across both sectors, the system vendors and within the independent storage vendors, but it's some of the more unique and novel approaches relative to storage implementation does occur within the independent storage vendors. So we'll be continuing to keep an eye and a lookout on technologies and solutions that are coming from the independent storage vendors. Looking at file systems, this is one area where we do see some of the innovation occurring, particularly as a result of increased adoption of AI, particularly in the enterprise data center space. Users are starting to adopt HPC infrastructure for their HPC-enabled AI workloads, and due to the different levels of expertise and even different levels of requirements within an enterprise data center, things such as replication and other types of data services, data management services, we continue to see innovation within the file systems to address those particular areas for enterprises to adopt HPC infrastructure. Looking at where the data is stored, we continue to see the transition from HDDs to SSDs being used to store the data, and we continue to see SSDs being adopted, but at the same time we do see investment and adoption of the HDDs as well. There's roughly a similar deployment of all flash arrays and all HDDs, HDD arrays within HPC infrastructure, albeit at different use cases. As the HDDs continue to be adopted, they are more and more being utilized with active archive and large object-based storage systems for on-prem. Looking at the storage interconnects, we continue to see adoption of InfiniBand and Ethernet, and with Fiber Channel showing its continued lower and decreasing adoption. As InfiniBand and Ethernet both continue to drive up the bandwidth in their roadmap in order to satisfy the performance requirements being placed on the systems by the data-intensive workloads, and GPU accelerated compute platforms are continuing to drive innovation within the InfiniBand and Ethernet area. And it's not just in the hardware aspects of it, it's in the protocol area where they're maintaining the bandwidth at the gigabit per second, but also lowering the latencies by RDMA capabilities and GPU direct access mechanisms to further drive down the latency access of the data. As we look forward and looking at areas for future research where we're going to be looking and providing insights into, the on-premises HPC systems will continue to be there. Their innovation is occurring there, and there will be continued requirement for on-prem. Within 2020, roughly 72% of the HPC spend was in the on-premises infrastructure. While we still see, and then out in the forecast period within 2024, roughly it's still the majority, but it will be at 60% as opposed, and the other 40% being being provided by the HPDA, AI, MLDL workloads and investments. And within that, within the AI MLDL space, there's roughly 9% today within 2020 being spent on that area, and that's looking to grow to about 20% in the future on AI, ML, and DL. Cloud is also driving new use cases relative to storage. We'll be continuing to look at and understand, as I mentioned, continuing to see how the users are spending within the cloud and storage. We'll also be developing insights into the CSPs and where they are spending money relative to storage. Also, an understanding of file systems as they're being adopted into the cloud and areas that will ease the use and adoption of the cloud. One of the inhibitors of cloud adoption is any changes that are needing to be made to the applications. So any and all effort that can be done to minimize or eliminate changes to code and the data platform, keeping the data platform consistent between access from on-prem or in the cloud will greatly promote adoption of cloud. Relative to the data management area too, the workflow management as edge becomes more and more critical. The data is being generated and stored out on the edge, and another area of concern with cloud adoption is relative to various cost and pricing aspects of it, including data movement. So moving the compute out to where the data is and collected and stored can tend to minimize the cost aspects, and we're seeing as edge computing and computational storage become adopted, there'll be areas to look at there. Other within the technology itself, we're seeing an increased adoption of containers. We're seeing in the efforts to improve performance, questioning what level of POSIX compliancy is continuing to be required into the future. And then lastly, other memory topics relative to big memory and persistent memory, and different other different techniques that look to alleviate traditional architectures of the host needing to get involved with data analysis and data movement within memory computing and other persistent memory innovations, being able to have the direct access to the storage and eliminating host access is a keen area to look at. So with that as an introduction and a brief market update, I want to turn our attention to the storage panel that's coming up with the three participants included in the panel. They were given 3 questions to consider, describing 1 or 2 storage-related areas where they believe innovation is required, how those innovations will benefit HPC, and what's being done to address those areas of innovation. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Jeff Denworth, Chief Marketing Officer of Vast Data, Jeff Lundberg, Senior Product Manager with Hitachi Vantara, and then lastly, Mohammed El Datal within the Office of the CTO at Seagate Technologies. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to the panelists.